all of these government authorities. And speaking of government authorities, they were also supposed to have ensured that all our schools are safe. So now our waters, we're not so sure. Our schools, we're not so sure either. And here we are, the aftermath of Precious Talent Academy collapsing. Again, have we seen any heads roll? Of course, schools are being brought down one after the other.
Yvonne, something very interesting during the Requiem Mass for the 8 pupils who lost their lives is that no one was baying for the blood of the school's owner at all when they were speaking. You'd expect them to do that. But he was fulfilling a need in that area. In that place, they don't have a public school nearby. And then they fulfill a need for the residents of that place. They were willing to pay for their children to go to school because they have no other options. So they're calling this the informal schools. And they are supposed to be in low-income neighborhoods. But for the residents of that area and many others where there are no public schools nearby, these people were fulfilling a need. There's a school for my child. They go to every morning. And remember, the standards of education in this country sometimes worry me. There was a report that was done by Uwezo Kenya in 2013, and it showed that 70% of pupils in class 3 do not know how to do class 2 work, for example. They cannot read. So when someone comes and they're able to actually provide for you some form of education at an affordable fee, and karibu utaenda, because chances are that public school may not have teachers, may not have books, may not have desks, na ni mbali for nothing. So sometimes I feel that we need to sort of like tibu shida yenyewe badala ya kwanza utafuta majibu kwingine, because the problem is hakuna shule where they're supposed to be.
Doesn't it sound like a broken record, Francis? We keep saying the same thing of every tragedy, of every situation, and we don't learn. It's not for lack of information. We know what needs to be done, but yet here we are.
Yeah, because we are a country of crackdowns. Once something happens, we crack down, then we restore to factory settings, then something else comes up that requires some crackdown and some reactions, then we go to it. Now, nobody is talking about the state of our schools because we are in Mombasa. And after Mombasa, we will be probably
do a crackdown on ferries first.
Yeah, we'll go to something else. But I think ultimately, by now, if the government was to function properly, I would have expected that the Ministry of Education would have demanded from all inspectors of schools reports on the state of facilities in schools.
But they said they're doing an audit.
If they don't have by now.
They said they're doing
because
an
that's an audit that can take a very short time. I mean, we say there are 1,500 school inspectors in this country. With about 30,000 or thereabout public schools, it's something they can do 20 schools each. So, I mean, I want to imagine, let's say, in the neighborhood of Kilimani where we are, one inspector can do inspections in all these schools within a day or two and file the necessary reports. Otherwise, we should not wait for another disaster to happen in another school so that we see our government responding to those things.
I think, Yvonne, there's nothing wrong with the government or authorities taking some drastic action when something happens, like what we saw. I mean, that's what a government ought to do. The only difference, I think, in our case is that this crackdown happens. We probably set up a task force or do something like that. They give us recommendations, then we do nothing about it. I think that is what is particularly disheartening about this thing, because, you know, when you talk about buildings collapsing, I mean, it was a school the other day, but it has been many other buildings in this country before. I mean, the most recent that is so big that I remember was the Huruma tragedy in April. It should have been of 2016, I think it was. And there were things that happened there.
In fact, Joe, just today, a building collapsed in Butali.
In
Kakamega County.
So you find these things happen. I mean, every country, for example, when there was 9/11, they had the 9/11 Commission that made serious recommendations. Some of them we experience when we travel in airports. They have things about intelligence sharing and that sort of thing. And they identify where the failures occurred, and then they try to redress them. Here we have a situation where people are about to run. So I think we need to
hold that thought. I feel like sector in the wake of the collapse of the school. Joe, you were
I think those they ran away with my thoughts. But honestly, I think I was saying there's nothing particularly wrong with the actions, the drastic actions that governments take when something happens. I think the difference comes in whether you are able to gather information and then put it to use. Because here we have done many things. Every time there is a tragedy, we have many reports that come up. The one that Jamila referred to about the Mtongwe ferry, there's no evidence that we implemented it. So at the one level, there is always this thing that leaders jump up and down as if they didn't live in that place before. You've seen even in Mombasa, including the governor, you'd think he has come from another planet, but he lives there, so he knows that there's a problem with the ferry. He can't surely discover that when there's a tragedy. So I think the same thing has happened with this, where we have officials who actually behave as if they didn't know that those kinds of schools exist, as if they didn't know that particular school existed. Informal, private, public, whatever name you give to an institution, as long as children, Kenyan children, wake up every morning and walk into a certain place which they call a school, there is a duty of care. That is what it is called, that the government has, that they need to ensure that people are safe when they go into those places. And therefore, for me, for us to now go on this crackdown where we are closing schools and all of that, that will only make a difference if at the end of the day we learn something from what happened at Precious Talent Top. Wow, that name. And then we make sure it doesn't happen again.
And talking of that crackdown, Joe, one of the issues that is emerging is the crackdown is targeting private schools. Now, this presupposes that the quality of public schools is okay, which is a very, very wrong assumption. A lot of public schools are in dire condition. They don't have enough classrooms. They don't have enough facilities in terms of desks and all that. And in fact, in certain places,
mud walls.
At least you can talk of walls. Last week we carried a story about a school in Laikipia North that doesn't have walls. Basically, it's a properly open air school. Now, when we have a government that is very enthusiastically closing down these schools and saying you're going to transfer their children to public schools, then shortly we are going to deal with a problem of the quality and state of public schools themselves. And indeed, the Kenya Alliance of Non-Formal Schools Welfare Association, which is a body of the private schools, has told government to not be very emotive about what happened, react with more reason, because closing down these private schools will actually result in a new crisis. And they do state that their schools are about 20,000. That's a very substantial number of schools that carry a lot of the school children.
Indeed, and you know, when you speak about task forces and audits that were done, we highlighted this last week. There was a task force that was put together. It was headed by Dr. Mark Matunga, had quite a number of them. It was commissioned by the then governor, Dr. Evans Kidero, in 2014. They did their work in 3 months and found the state of public education seriously wanting. But this is what is hopefully not seriously wanting. There's